continue to get ready for UFC 297 out in Toronto, coming up this Saturday night. In the main event, it is Sean Strickland against Dricus du Plessis for the UFC's middleweight championship, one of two title fights on this card. We have been getting ready for this all week. I am relatively excited for a lot of the fights coming up on Saturday night. We're going to have a full preview of the card coming up on Friday's show. But for right now, let's look at some of the other things that are happening around the world of MMA. And we begin with Tatiana Suarez, who is out of UFC 298. This was one of the big fights that we were talking about a couple of UFCs ago, as Suarez is someone who has had a 4-year layoff, but at her best is an absolute juggernaut and had the potential to be the next face of women's mixed martial arts, in my opinion. And so now a 4-year layoff, now she has to wait a couple of months. On the one hand, it doesn't sound like it's a long-term injury. So it sounds like we could be getting her back sooner rather than later. So you've waited 4 years, what's another few months? On the other hand, it's someone who's been out for 4 years. And so when you have someone who has that lengthy injury history, it doesn't go great. Or it doesn't look great when they then have an injury that delays their fight. So hopefully, like, perfect world, she's right and ready to go a couple of months from now at UFC 300, and you put you put a spotlight on another really good contender for the UFC. But this one, it's just a bummer, man. Was really excited to see that particular fight. There has been a lot going on in the Bellator PFL area, and so I think there's a lot to cover there. We will get to that in a second here, but speaking of UFC 300, Jim Miller is going to be on UFC 300, coming off of his win at UFC Vegas 84 last weekend. Jim Miller is going to be on the card, and the reason this is so exciting is that this is someone who has, like, again, the most fights in the history of the UFC, most wins in the history of the UFC, and on down the line, most cage time in the history of the sport as well. But he's also been on UFC 100 and UFC 200 in what has been a remarkable career for him. Now he's got a fight booked, UFC 300. He's going to take on Bobby Green. This is not a fight that is going to dictate a whole lot in the rankings, but it's going to be fun as hell to watch these two veterans of the fight game go head-to-head in that octagon at UFC 300. I cannot wait for this fight, and I just love that it is happening. Also at UFC 300, it is going to be the BMF title on the line with Justin Gaethje against Max Holloway. This is going to be I think the potential to be an all-timer, especially given the platform, again, UFC 300. To have this level of violence, I think, is going to be a blast for people. For Gaethje, he called for a title fight. There is a title eliminator on this card, so he is going to have to win at least this fight to get that title opportunity, and honestly, probably another one if he wants that shot at the belt at 155 pounds. But this has been a nice little run for him. He's won 3 in a row now, coming off of a couple of losses where it felt like maybe it's it. Or he's going to be looking for 3 wins in a row, after a couple of losses where it's like, maybe this is it. Going up against Max Holloway, who is so clearly the best 145-pounder in the world, not named Alex Volkanovski, but now he has to move, I think, to 100. This is a necessary move. He's not going to get a 4th title shot against Volkanovski, and Topuria does not seem like someone I'd want to be fucking with right now. So I think Holloway is someone who presents an interesting challenge coming up here at coming up to 155 pounds at UFC 300. He has a body type that fits, right? Like, he's not going to look small at 155. He's kind of looked big for 145. So I think he's going to be fine when it comes to the reach advantage. He's not a one-hitter quitter power guy anyway at his best. Like, he can do it. He punches harder than I can, that's for sure. But he is someone who is going to just overwhelm you with volume. And I think moving up to 155 pounds isn't going to slow that down. So I'm very fascinated to see this fight. Early thought is that it goes Gaethje, but I can't wait to break this fight down and dive into a little bit more to veterans of the fight game. And speaking of the title eliminator at UFC 300, it is going to be Charles Oliveira against Arman Tsarukyan. Tsarukyan coming off of a big fight over Beneil Dariush, and he has really exploded up here in the rankings at 155 pounds. And I think is one of the names to watch at lightweight. But this is a huge jump up against Charles de Bronx, who is one of the all-time greats at 155 pounds. And so it's a great bit of matchmaking. It's really fun, and it's great to see, like, okay, is Tsarukyan the next guy? Is he what he has shown over the next little bit? Can he do that against the top of the top? Because if you can beat Charles de Bronx, you can beat anybody in the lightweight division. And so we will get that opportunity to see that at UFC 300. And then Davison Figueiredo looking for back-to-back wins in a new division, taking on Cody Garbrandt. Figueiredo opening up as a minus 310 favorite. Garbrandt making a bit of a push. He's won back-to-back fights, while Figueiredo beats Rob Font in his move up to 135 pounds. I initial thought is I think Figueiredo runs right through Garbrandt. I think this is a good bit of like star building for Figueiredo, because I think this is going to be an all action fight, and it kind of solidifies him as a potential challenger. It's a big name. It's going to be a fun fight. And for Cody, and if he loses, Cody Garbrandt then has won 3 in a row. It's a recognizable name. You can tell a bit of a retribution story or whatever, even though Cody is wildly unlikable. You can tell a bit of a story there. So no matter how this fight ends up going, you can tell a lot of fun stories for it for the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Mentioned before, PFL and Bellator have announced their first big card. And one of the names that I think everyone should watch out for is Vadim Nemkov. He moves up to heavyweight, vacating the Bellator 205-pound, the light heavyweight championship. He is going to face the PFL heavyweight champion, Bruno Carazola, or I'm saying that wrong, Caraloza, sorry. Don't talk a lot of PFL, so I haven't had to say that name before. I think Nemkov has the opportunity to be the face of this new brand. Obviously, there are like the marquee names, right? Like they have a deal with Jake Paul. They have a deal with Francis Ngannou, although they don't appear to be high on Ngannou's priorities at the moment. But they have a couple of big name deals. But in terms of the, like, not just popping in once or twice a year kind of guys, like the real, like, that this guy is going to be a full-time ambassador for PFL, Nemkov has the opportunity to be that. He has been just a beast in the light heavyweight division in Bellator, and now he moves up to heavyweight. I am always so intrigued by guys at 205 pounds moving up to the heavyweight landscape, because I think 205 traditionally has been significantly more difficult than heavyweight is. And Bellator's heavyweight champion is the one who's done that, with Ryan Bader moving up. So I think this is a really fun opportunity, but I would say Nemkov has the chance to be like the guy from this group, and kind of the guy who fight fans would point to as like, well, yeah, sure, like UFC has most of the good fighters. This might be the best guy not in the UFC right now, and this might be the guy who could beat the other champions in the UFC. Now, moving up to heavyweight, I don't know how many people would say Nemkov could beat John Jones, but I think if you put Nemkov in the 205-pound division in the UFC right now, that guy's taking the title. That's just where I come down on that. Other ones for this card, I think it's interesting that it's going to be in Saudi Arabia. I think it's a bit of a flex to the UFC, who do not have that Saudi money yet. Technically, I guess they do with Endeavor and TKO now, with the WWE having links to the Saudi government. But look, it's weird to talk nice about the Saudi Arabia given everything that's going on and has gone on in that part of the world. But from just a pure fight standpoint, this is a bit of flexing your muscles on the UFC, and it puts a bit of a spotlight on them, because a lot of things in Saudi Arabia get that spotlight. For negative reasons, of course, but it does add a bit of grandeur to it, as frustrating as that may be. Renan Ferreira taking on Ryan Bader in the heavyweight division. Bader, I think, is definitely the biggest name, again, outside of the Jake Paul, Francis Ngannou's, outside of the special attraction guys. In terms of the regular roster, Ryan Bader, I think, has the biggest name coming from the UFC. A title challenger, I believe, in the UFC, at least has fought in title eliminators before, has fought Tito Ortiz, like, big name. And I think probably rolls in this fight in the heavyweight division. It's tricky right now, right? Because you have the PFL heavyweight champion against Nemkov. Ferreira won the heavyweight Grand Prix that they had in 2023. So you're gonna this, I think, basically sets up as like tournament semifinals for what will ultimately be the PFL Bellator World Championship, or however they kind of break it all down. Johnny Eblen is another name. He's going up against Impa Kaganani. Again, sorry for the pronunciations on these. It's a middleweight fight. Eblen, again, is so dangerous. He has been a real force in Bellator right now, in their middleweight division, beating a lot of relatively big names going through there. And he is another one that I think a lot of people are going to take notice for. Like PFL buying out Bellator, I don't think it's great for the sport. It helps their brand out a little bit. Like it makes it, like this fight feels like the most important thing Bellator and PFL have done in a very long time. So you get that initial boost, but I think a lot of the Bellator fighters are going to have a lot of success on these fights. I'll just say that. Patricio Freire, Pitbull, taking on Jesus Pinedo. Pinedo, kind of a Cinderella story through the 145-pound tournament in PFL, just beating like, okay, well now this guy's a tournament favorite, beat him. Okay, well now this guy's a tournament favorite, beat him. All right, this guy champion. But going up against Patricio, who is a long-time legend in Bellator and one of like the faces on the Mount Rushmore of Bellator. So this will be an intriguing fight because at some point you have to stop doubting the kid. But for right now, I think this one would go to Pitbull. And then there's a couple of other just interesting fights that don't have titles aligned to them. Thiago Santos, former title challenger in the UFC, taking on Yoel Romero, former title challenger in the UFC. Also on this card, Aaron Pico. At one time had top prospect status in the sport, lost that, and has now kind of got it back again. And Clarissa Shields is a big name on this as well. She's going to be fighting on this card. So overall, I think this is a really good card that PFL and Bellator are putting out. I don't love that it's on pay-per-view, but I understand the need to branch out into that realm. And if you're going to do it, excuse me, a fight with all of these fights on it makes all the sense in the world. So I think that the MMA world is set for a really interesting 2024. 2023, I don't think was a banner year for MMA. It wasn't bad, but excuse me, you're set up pretty well, I think, for 2024 here with some of the fights. Even just like UFC 300 is going to be a tentpole event. You have International Fight Week with Conor McGregor. We'll see if Ngannou fights in this calendar year in the PFL, but obviously they have a lot going on in that organization as well. So I think we're going to have a really fun year here in 2024 in mixed martial arts.